My parents took out a $170 0-cent K loan in my name, so I made a move they'll regret forever. It started with an email from the bank. The subject line looked ordinary, nothing screamed emergency, but when I opened it, my entire body went cold. According to them, I owed $170,000, 0 cents. At first, I thought it was a phishing scam or some computer glitch. My college tuition was never supposed to be that much. I had a scholarship and a part-time job, and I budgeted every semester like a man possessed. So where the hell did this come from? I tried to breathe. My hands were shaking as I clicked through the details. It wasn't a scam, it was real. And the loan, it was under my name. What I did next, I'll never forget. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I stood up, grabbed my keys, and drove straight to the house of the two people who I thought had always wanted the best for me. They looked surprised to see me. They should be. Growing up, I never thought I'd be the kind of person who had to question whether his parents loved him equally. My brother Evan and I are twins. Same birthday, same house, same blood, but somehow we grew up in two different families, or at least it felt that way. When we were kids, things weren't terrible. My mom would take us both to soccer practice, and my dad taught us how to ride bikes in the same parking lot. We shared bunk beds and fought over the TV remote like every other pair of brothers. But somewhere along the way, things started to shift. Evan was the dreamer. He hated school, loved attention, and always seemed to be chasing the next big thing. Acting, modeling, music, you name it, he tried it. And every time he failed, our parents would cushion the fall. New gear, new coaches, new mentors. Meanwhile, I was the steady one. I liked the structure, got good grades, and followed the rules. They said they were proud of me, sure, but it always felt quieter. By high school, the contrast between us was obvious. Evan got into fights, skipped class, and barely passed. I was on the honor roll, worked part-time at a coffee shop, and spent weekends volunteering. I wasn't jealous. At least, not then. I just thought I was doing what you were supposed to do. When it came time to apply for college, I handled the whole process myself. Essays, applications, scholarships. I did it all without help. I remember sitting at the dinner table one night, telling my parents that I'd gotten a partial scholarship to a great school. My dad said, "That's great, son," without looking up from his phone. Evan, meanwhile, had just gotten a call back from some local casting agency, and my mom nearly cried from excitement. Still, I held on to this idea that love doesn't have to look the same to be equal. Maybe they just worried about Evan more. Maybe they thought I didn't need the attention. Maybe when I left for college, I felt hopeful. I believed in hard work. I believed that if I kept my head down and did everything right, the future would reward me. I budgeted like crazy, worked late nights at the campus cafe, and skipped every spring break trip to save money. Evan, meanwhile, bounced from city to city, chasing modeling gigs, crashing on friends' couches, posting Instagram stories like he was already famous. Anytime I visited home, it was the same story. Evan needed help with rent, Evan's car broke down, Evan's agent flaked. My parents would sigh dramatically, shake their heads, and pull out their checkbooks. And every time I asked how they were doing, they'd say, "Don't worry about us, we're just proud of you." I believed them, I really did. But looking back now, I realized that I was playing a role. The responsible son, the quiet achiever, the one they didn't have to worry about. And while I was busy making sure I never became a burden, they were pouring everything into Evan without a second thought. You know, the worst part, I never once asked for more because I thought I didn't need to. There was one winter break I'll never forget. I came home with a cracked laptop screen, something I couldn't afford to fix right away. Evan, meanwhile, showed up with a brand new camera and a designer backpack for his content shoots, courtesy of mom and dad. When I asked him how he could afford it, mom just said, he needs it for his future. That word, need, started to sting. What about what I needed? I needed rest. I needed support. I needed to not feel like my entire worth hinged on whether or not I could survive on my own. But I didn't say any of that. I smiled. I went back to campus and I worked extra shifts to fix my laptop. It's easy now to look back and say, I should have seen the writing on the wall. But when you're in it, when you're trained to be the one who doesn't complain, it's hard to realize that being silent doesn't make you strong. It makes you invisible. So I kept grinding. I took extra credits. I networked like hell. I graduated early. And when I landed that internship, I finally let myself feel proud. I thought maybe now, maybe finally, they'd look at me the way they looked at Evan. They didn't. And that's when everything really started to unravel. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I kept telling myself it was all in my head, that maybe I was being too sensitive, too dramatic, but the signs were everywhere. Looking back, I don't know how I missed them. It started small, little things. I'd mention a new project at work and my parents would nod politely before switching the topic to Evan's latest audition. I'd send them photos from my apartment, my first real space, and all I'd get back was a thumbs up emoji. Meanwhile, Evan posted a shirtless selfie on some Airbnb and mom would share it with a dozen relatives. Our star, she'd caption it. Once during a video call, I told them I might be up for a promotion at the company I interned for. It was a big deal. I was only a few months in and already my manager was giving me real responsibility. My mom smiled but then said, "That's great, sweetie. Did you see Evan's new headshots? He's looking so mature." Like my career was just background noise to Evan's latest Instagram post. I tried not to let it get to me. I really did. I told myself they were just excited for him, that they didn't mean to dismiss my wins, but it kept happening. Evan predictably ran into problems. He had no consistent income. He moved apartments twice in 6 months. His car got repossessed. And every time my parents bailed him out. Quietly, without drama, without asking him to take any real responsibility, and without ever telling me. I found out only because of a slip-up. My mom forwarded me an email by mistake, a receipt for a $2,500 0 cents wire transfer to Evan. I stared at it, confused. I texted her, "What's this?" She replied, "Oh, just helping your brother get through a rough patch. You know how it is." Do I? Because when I needed help with my textbooks one semester, just $300 0 cents short after my hours got cut at the cafe, I didn't get a wire transfer. I got a lecture about budgeting and independence. I brought it up later, calmly. I asked them why they kept stepping in for Evan, but never offered me that same safety net. My dad said something like, "You've always been more responsible. Evan just needs more help." My mom added, "You've always found a way, honey. We believe in you." That should have felt like a compliment. It didn't. It felt like code for, "You're not allowed to fail." The worst was when Evan moved back home temporarily and stayed for almost a year. I'd visit on holidays and he'd be there, lounging on the couch, playing video games, talking about how his big break was just around the corner. My parents would dote on him like he was royalty returning from battle. And me? I'd spend the whole visit tiptoeing around their moods, trying not to sound judgy, trying not to make waves. One night, I offered to help with dishes after dinner. My mom laughed and said, "Oh, don't worry, Evan already promised he'd do them later." He didn't. They were still in the sink the next morning, and no one said a word. I realized that I'd become a guest in my own family, a bystander to their golden child saga. No matter what I did, no matter how much I accomplished, I was always just Jake, the one who didn't need help, the one who'd be fine, even when I wasn't. The final straw came on my birthday. Evan had just moved out of their house, again, and was staying with a friend in LA. I didn't expect a big celebration or anything. I just thought maybe they'd call, maybe we'd have dinner. Instead, I got a generic happy birthday text from mom at 3 p.m. No call. No invite. Nothing from dad. That same day, I saw on Facebook that they had sent Evan a birthday package. Shoes, headphones, and a handwritten letter that my mom had posted a picture of. So proud of the man you're becoming. I read it in my car on my lunch break and just sat there. Not angry, just, um, it's weird how long you can go pretending something doesn't hurt until it finally breaks you. I wasn't asking to be the favorite. I just wanted to matter. And somewhere deep down, I realized that to them, being the strong one meant being the forgotten one. It happened just days after I landed my dream internship. I'd been working nonstop to get to that point, juggling part-time jobs, keeping my GPA high, and showing up early to every opportunity. And now, for once, I felt like things were finally falling into place. Then I got the email. It was from my bank. The subject line read, "Urgent action required loan account." My stomach dropped. I hadn't applied for any new loans. I clicked it open, half expecting it to be a phishing scam, but it wasn't. According to the statement, I had an outstanding loan of $170,000, 0 cents. I read it 3 times, my brain refusing to compute. That couldn't be right. My scholarship covered more than half my tuition. The rest I paid through a small student loan, some savings, and endless hours behind a coffee shop counter. Even if I added it all together, it shouldn't be more than $40,000. 0 cents. Where the hell was this number coming from? I called the bank thinking surely this was an error. The rep pulled up my account and walked me through it line by line. The loan had been taken out in my name, tied to my student ID. The disbursement started back in my sophomore year and continued through my final semester. And the numbers, they added up painfully. The full $170,000, 0 cents, had been taken out across several disbursements. And according to the records, authorized by me, only I had never signed for anything beyond my original student loan. I was still trying to breathe. I called my mom. At first, she was casual. "Oh, that's probably just a mistake. The bank always messes something up," but there was a tone in her voice, tight, rehearsed, like she already knew exactly what this was. I pressed harder. "Mom, it says the loan is in my name for $170, 0 cents K. That's more than double my actual costs." There was a long pause. Then, "Well, we might have taken out a bit extra just in case your scholarship didn't cover everything." A bit? Yeah, it doesn't explain an extra $130,000, 0 cents. I asked her how much they took, how much they used, how much went to me. She hesitated, then sighed. "Your brother needed some help." My vision blurred. Help? With what? He didn't even go to college. Her voice dropped. "He was struggling. He had dreams. We thought if we gave him a little boost, he could finally get his career going." "How much did you give him?" More silence. Then, barely audible, 80,000. I could barely process it. They'd taken a loan in my name. A loan I'd have to pay back for the next 2 decades, and given nearly half of it to Evan, not even for a house or an emergency, for his modeling career. And they didn't even tell me. I wasn't angry at first, not really. I was numb. I hung up the phone and just sat there, staring at the wall, trying to make it make sense. I pulled out old emails, old loan docs, and anything that could explain how they got away with this. That's when I remembered. When I was 18, my parents had me sign a bunch of financial aid forms. Standard college stuff, they said. Turns out, buried in those papers was a blanket authorization, enough to let them apply for private loans under my name while I was still technically a dependent. I used my trust, my signature, my name for Evan. I went back to their house that weekend. I didn't tell them I was coming. When I walked in, my dad was watching TV and my mom was folding laundry. Like, everything was normal. Like, they hadn't just detonated my future. I sat down and laid out everything, the documents, the balances, the timeline. My dad looked uncomfortable. We were just trying to help both of you. I asked him if he thought helping meant lying. If helping meant debt, I never agreed to. He said, we figured you'd be able to handle it. You've always been good with money. Handle it? I laughed out loud. It wasn't funny, but it was the only sound I could make. They really thought I just ate it. $170,000 0 cents for Evan's broken dreams and my obedience. I stood up, said nothing, and walked out. And that's when I knew this wasn't just a betrayal. It was a choice. They chose him. Over the next few days, I spiraled. I couldn't focus at work. I skipped meals. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, half expecting another revelation, another buried betrayal. My mom sent a few texts, let's talk soon, or don't stress, sweetie, but I didn't respond because what was left to say? They stole from me. There's no softer way to put it. I tried talking to Evan. That might have been the worst part. I cornered him at a family cookout 2 weekends later. He looked surprised to see me, said, hey man, long time. I asked him, calmly at first, if he knew about the loan. His eyebrows scrunched. What loan? I told him the $170 0 cents K, the $80 0 cents K, that went to him. He blinked. Oh, that thing. He shrugged. I didn't ask them to do that. They just said they had some money to help out. I thought it was a gift. A gift. I don't know what I expected. Maybe regret, maybe even an apology. But he didn't offer either. Instead, he reached for a beer and said, well, don't stress too much. You're smart. You'll figure it out. And he walked away. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling for hours, one question spinning over and over in my mind. How do you make peace with the fact that your own family sold your future and never even bothered to tell you? There's a kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep. It's the kind that sets in when you realize everything you've worked for, everything you believed in, might have been a lie. That was me the week after I found out about the loan. I went through the motions, wake up, shower, commute, smile at coworkers, but inside I was unraveling. Every time I looked at my inbox, I'd panic. Every time I checked my bank app, my chest tightened. I'd sit at my desk, pretending to write emails while actually calculating interest rates, repayment plans, and worst-case scenarios. I stopped eating much. My fridge was a graveyard of takeout leftovers. My girlfriend Liz noticed right away. She asked what was wrong, gently at first, then more urgently when I kept brushing her off. Eventually, I broke down and told her the whole story. The loan, my parents, Evan. She didn't interrupt, just sat there, eyes wide, absorbing it all. And when I finished, she whispered, Jake, this is abuse. That word hit harder than I expected. I'd been calling it a mistake, a misunderstanding, something that could be reasoned with, but she was right. It wasn't just a financial error, it was betrayal, manipulation, and exploitation. And it was killing me. I didn't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time. My appetite vanished. I started snapping at Liz, withdrawing from friends. I canceled plans and ignored calls. I'd lie on my couch for hours, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I wasn't drowning. At one point, I Googled how to disappear and not pay student loans. I knew it was irrational. I wasn't actually planning to vanish, but I wanted out, desperately. Out of the pressure, out of the debt, out of the crushing weight of knowing my own parents did this to me. I remember one night in particular, it was raining, heavy, relentless, loud against my apartment windows. I was curled up on the floor in the dark, just done. My phone was off. My laptop was closed. The silence felt safer than facing anything. And yet, in that silence, I heard a voice, my own voice, quiet, firm, just one sentence. This can't be the end of your story. That sentence saved me. It wasn't a lightning bolt of hope, it was a flicker, a breath, but it was enough to make me get up off the floor, rinse my face, and turn my phone back on. There was a message from Liz, "I'm here when you're ready, we'll figure this out together." And that was when I remembered I wasn't alone. I had people who saw me, who believed me, who didn't think I was just strong enough to handle anything and therefore owed nothing. I didn't have a solution yet, but I had a spark. And for the first time in weeks, that felt like something worth holding on to. The next morning, I called in sick to work, not because I was physically ill, but because I couldn't keep pretending. I needed space. I needed to breathe. I spent the whole day walking aimlessly around the city, through parks, across bridges, into old bookstores where no one knew my name. I didn't buy anything, I just wandered, trying to remember what life felt like before everything fell apart. That evening, I met Liz at a coffee shop. She brought her laptop, a notebook, and a resolve that I hadn't seen before. "Let's get to work," she said. And we did. She helped me organize all my loan documents. We color-coded every disbursement, compared them to tuition invoices, and tracked every suspicious transfer. It felt overwhelming at first, like trying to map out a spider web of lies. But with every highlighter stroke, I felt a little more control returning. I still cried that night, quietly, out of grief, out of rage. But for the first time, I didn't feel like the crying meant weakness. It meant I was still here, and I was still fighting. That weekend, I called my older cousin Eric. He was a lawyer, not in student loans, but smart enough to guide me. I told him everything. He didn't gasp. He didn't pity me. He just asked, "Do you want to fight this or survive it?" "Both," I said. "Good," he replied, "because you can." And that's when the tide began to shift, not because the problem had gone away, but because I'd stopped running from it. That flicker of hope grew into a plan. Healing didn't look like I thought it would. I imagined some grand moment, confronting my parents, walking away victorious, getting a check in the mail with "We're sorry" scrawled across the memo line. But healing turned out to be quieter, smaller, messier. It started with boundaries. The day after I talked to my cousin Eric, I called my parents. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, I just said, "I know what you did, and from now on, I'm handling this my way." My mom started crying, my dad got defensive, but I didn't budge. I told them I needed space and that I didn't want any calls, any texts, or any family updates unless it was about fixing what they broke, and then I hung up. It was the first time in my life I didn't feel guilty for putting myself first. From there, I got practical. Liz and I built a shared Google Drive of all loan documents. Eric connected me with a financial counselor who specialized in student debt fraud. We combed through every form I'd signed, every cent that had moved. The more I saw it, it laid out in front of me, the more real it became and the more determined I felt to do something about it. I filed a fraud report with the loan provider. They didn't exactly leap to help me after all my name was on the forms, but the counselor helped me phrase everything carefully. "Misrepresentation under familial duress," she called it. Not a guarantee, but a start. I also opened a new bank account, changed all my passwords, pulled my credit report. The sense of violation I felt knowing how much access they had to my life made me physically sick, but taking back control, one login at a time, felt like breathing again. Evan reached out once. He sent a voice note, some half-hearted apology about how he never meant for things to get so complicated. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I poured my energy into work. I stopped trying to pretend everything was fine and asked my supervisor if I could shift some responsibilities while I sorted through a personal financial emergency. She didn't press for details, she just said, "We've got your back." And for the first time in weeks, I believe someone meant it. Outside of work, I started running. Not far, not fast, but enough to feel the ground under my feet, enough to feel like I was moving forward. Liz and I started cooking dinner together every night, something simple, stir fry, tacos, boxed mac and cheese. We'd put on music, dance in the kitchen, and talk about nothing important. It was the most peace I'd felt in months. One night she asked me, "What would justice look like for you?" I didn't answer right away because I realized I didn't just want money back. I wanted accountability. I wanted them to understand what they'd done. Not explain it, not justify it, understand it, feel it. And maybe, just maybe, I wanted them to hurt a little too. Not out of vengeance, but because I finally understood something. Love without responsibility isn't love. It's convenient. And I wasn't going to be convenient anymore. 2 weeks later, I filed a formal complaint with the Department of Education and initiated the process of consulting legal action. Eric helped me draft the letter. It wasn't full of venom, it was calm, professional, devastating in its clarity. I sent a copy to my parents. They didn't respond, not right away. But a week later, my dad emailed me. It was short, "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. By that point, I had made my decision. It wasn't just fixing a financial mess, I was reclaiming my life. Rebuilding myself looked like therapy appointments every Tuesday, like budgeting apps and YouTube meal prep, like sleeping through the night for the first time in a year. And slowly, like a sunrise cracking through storm clouds, I started to feel proud again. Not proud because of how much I endured, but because of how clearly I could now see that I was worth protecting. Even if they never had that clarity, that was the beginning of everything. I wasn't done yet, but I wasn't broken anymore either. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was coming back to life. Because surviving isn't enough anymore. I want peace, I want power, I want to choose who I become next. And that version of me doesn't live in fear of his own family. They thought I'd fold, they thought they knew me. But I wasn't the scared, quiet kid they raised anymore, and I was about to show them just how far I'd go to protect myself. It started with a lawyer. Eric's friend Jenna specialized in financial abuse and elder fraud, but she'd seen enough cases like mine to know exactly where to hit. They used your social security number without full consent. That's identity misuse, especially if you were misled. She laid it all out, what documentation I needed, what kind of case I could build, and how, if we played it right, I might even get a portion of the loan declared invalid. It felt impossible until it didn't. Over the next few weeks, I worked with Jenna to build my case. We documented everything, the loan statements, the forged permissions, and the mismatched tuition costs. I even recovered old emails from when I was in college, messages from my parents telling me not to worry about the loans, that they had it covered. The irony burned. We drafted a formal demand letter. I mailed it, certified, to my parents' house. 10 days later, I got an email from my mom. It was frantic, laced with guilt. She begged me not to ruin the family, promised they'd figure something out, but it wasn't enough. I gave them a clear deadline: pay back the $80,000 0 cents or I would file. They didn't. I did. And suddenly, the silence broke. My dad called the next day. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You're dragging us through the mud." I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said, "You had your chance." That was when the dynamic finally shifted. They tried to play the victim, but this time I had power. Real, legal power. And they couldn't handle it. The extended family started reaching out, some furious, others stunned. I didn't respond to most. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I wasn't out for revenge. I was out for justice. The court process began slowly, but Jenna moved like a surgeon, precise, calm, and completely in control. She filed for financial damages, citing unauthorized use of identity and intentional misrepresentation. In our state, that was a big deal. My parents tried to stall. They filed a motion to dismiss. It was denied. They tried to settle quietly, offering half the amount. I rejected it. That's when I got a message from Evan, a DM on Instagram of all places. You really suing mom and dad for real? I didn't respond. He didn't deserve an answer. Instead, I posted a single message to my story. Boundaries aren't betrayal. Sometimes love means walking away. It wasn't for him, it was for me. When the hearing date came, my parents showed up looking older, smaller. My dad didn't meet my eyes. My mom looked like she hadn't slept. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. The judge was firm but fair. Jenna laid out the evidence methodically and clearly, with zero dramatics. My parents' lawyer tried to play the loving parents under stress card. It didn't work. The judge ruled in my favor. They would be required to repay $80,000, 0 cents in damages, plus legal fees. More importantly, my credit would be flagged to protect me from further unauthorized use. I'd won. But I didn't celebrate because this wasn't a win. It was a boundary, a necessary, painful, overdue boundary. After the ruling, I walked out of the courthouse into a bright, cloudless afternoon. I felt hollow. Not triumphant, not sad, just free. Free from the silence, free from the guilt, free from the years of being the one who cleaned up after everyone else. It took a few weeks for the first payment to come in. I almost didn't cash the check. But then I thought about my future, the apartment I wanted to rent, the car I'd been putting off buying, the savings account I never got to build. I deposited it the next day. Word spread quickly. Some extended family members cut contact. A few reached out to apologize for doubting me. One aunt sent a card that simply read, "Proud of you." That meant more than I expected. Evan disappeared completely. Last I heard, he'd moved to Florida with a new girlfriend. I didn't care. As for my parents, we haven't spoken since the judgment. Sometimes I wonder what they tell themselves to sleep at night. That I was ungrateful, that I turned on them. I'll never know. And honestly, I don't need to. Because this wasn't about vengeance. This was about survival, about reclaiming a piece of myself I didn't even realize I'd lost. And now I'm building a life that's mine. Every dollar, every choice, every step forward. No more guilt, no more secrets, just truth and peace. There's one night I sat on my balcony, sipping a beer, thinking about how far things had come. If you'd told me a year ago I'd sue my own parents, I would have laughed. But life doesn't follow scripts, it writes its own. I wasn't proud of how it ended, but I was proud of myself for speaking up, for standing firm, for finally choosing me. And maybe that's what healing really looks like. Not a perfect reunion, not some fairy tale redemption, just the courage to break a cycle, to draw a line and say, this far, no further. That's what I did, and I'd do it again. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, finalizing the settlement. I stood there in a strange silence, not triumphant, not broken, just empty. A chapter had closed, but there was no applause, no family waiting in the hall, no celebratory hug. Just the sterile echo of justice, and me walking out alone. For days afterward, I didn't hear a thing from my parents. Not a call, not a text, just this heavy echoing void where they used to be. Then, quietly, words started to spread. My aunt called, trying to play mediator. You didn't have to go that far, Jake, she said. They're your parents. I just let the silence hang. What could I say? That love doesn't excuse betrayal? The fallout came fast. My dad lost his consulting clients. Apparently, some had heard through the grapevine. Small town networks are like that. And decided they didn't want to be associated with someone who would defraud their own son. My mom's boutique, which had barely scraped by, shuttered within 2 months. Too many people suddenly stopped shopping there. Karma doesn't knock, it just walks right in. As for Evan, he vanished. No texts, no Instagram posts, just gone. At first, I thought he was hiding out, embarrassed, maybe. But then a mutual friend messaged me. Evan had moved to Arizona, crashing with some girl he barely knew. Word was, he'd burned through the last of the money, and now he was broke, jobless, and bouncing between couches. Couldn't hold down a job, couldn't make rent. A golden boy turned ghost. One night, I got a message from him. It was short, just 3 words. You happy now? I stared at it for a long time. Was I had to reply. What was I supposed to say? That I hadn't set out to ruin anyone's life? That I hadn't wanted any of this, only fairness? That watching him fall apart didn't bring me joy, only this dull, tired ache? But I owed him nothing, not anymore. My mom reached out next, days later, through an email. A long, winding letter, full of apologies and justifications, all tangled up like a knot. She said they'd taken out a second mortgage to make the settlement payments, that she was depressed, that Dad barely spoke anymore, that Evan might be spiraling, and then she said the line that stuck with me. We never thought it would go this far. Neither did I. But they were the ones who crossed the line first. I thought back to all the years they'd praised Evan, funded his dreams, and told me to be patient, to be the stable one. They expected me to carry the weight while he flew, and when I finally said no, the whole system crumbled. That wasn't on me. One evening, I ran into an old family friend at a coffee shop. She gave me a long look, half curious, half cautious. Then she said quietly, "You did what you had to do. We all saw how they treated you. We just didn't think you'd ever fight back." That stuck with me, not because it was comforting, but because it was true. No one expects the quiet one to burn the bridge, but I had, and I didn't regret it. Not when I checked my bank account and saw the balance slowly rebuilding. Not when I slept through the night without waking in cold sweats over debt. Not when I walked past my reflection and didn't see guilt. Just a man who had fought to reclaim his future. My dad tried reaching out once more, months later, a voicemail. "I know I messed up," he said, his voice rough. "I miss you. Maybe we can talk sometime." I never called back. Not out of spite, but because some doors, once closed, don't need to be reopened. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconnection. Sometimes it just means peace. And I was finally starting to find mine. It's been a year now. A year since the lawsuit, a year since the settlement, a year since I walked away from the people who raised me and walked towards something like freedom. I'd love to tell you that everything wrapped up neatly after that, that the money came in, that I healed, that I somehow forgave them, and we're all having Sunday dinners again. But life isn't a Hallmark movie. Sometimes it's just messy, and that's okay. What I've learned over this past year is that healing doesn't always look like joy. Sometimes it looks like clarity, like sitting alone in your apartment and realizing you don't need their approval anymore, like signing a lease on a new place in a new city and not telling anyone back home, like finally learning how to stand up straight, not because someone's watching, but because you finally see yourself. I kept expecting the sadness to go away. But what I've found is that it just changes shape. It goes from a sharp pain to a quiet absence, a missing space where the family should have been. Some days I feel the weight of it more than others. Holidays are weird, birthdays too, but the silence is less hostile now, more peaceful. I've had to unlearn a lot, like the idea that love means sacrifice at all costs. Being the good child means letting people hurt you. That loyalty and self-betrayal are the same thing. They're not even close. I talk to a therapist now once a week. At first, I thought I was just going to work through the trauma of the loan, but what I discovered was a lot deeper. We unpacked years of feeling invisible, of being the backup plan, the one they relied on but never saw, and little by little, I started to understand that my worth was never supposed to come from them, that it had been mine all along. My job's going well. That internship turned into a full-time position. I even got promoted. Some days I still get imposter syndrome, but then I remember everything I've survived and it puts things in perspective. Debt, I handled that. Court, handled. Is my entire family turning against me? Still standing. And I'm proud of that. Not because I was strong the whole time. I wasn't. I cried more in those few months than I had in the rest of my life combined. I doubted myself constantly, but I kept going anyway. And that's what matters. Evan, I haven't heard from him in months. Last I heard, he was still floating from place to place, chasing gigs and excuses. I don't hate him anymore. I don't think I ever truly did. I just finally stopped waiting for him to be someone he's not. As for my parents, they've kept their word, mostly. The payments still come in, though sometimes late. I don't chase them down. I've made peace with the idea that I may never get every penny, but I already got what I needed: the truth, the separation, and the power to choose my own future. I don't know if they ever really understood what they did to me, or if they regret it, but that's not my burden to carry anymore. I'm done trying to make them see. I'm done shrinking to fit their expectations. Sometimes people ask if I'd do it all again, if I'd take them to court knowing everything it would cost, and the answer is yes. 1,000 times yes. Because the price of silence was higher than anything I'd paid since, because standing up for yourself is messy, painful, and lonely, but it's still worth it. Because I finally learned that loving yourself means walking away from people who don't, even if those people are your family.